The sun burned mercilessly over the Arizona territory as dust clouds swirled across the barren landscape. In the distance, the sound of galloping hooves echoed through the canyon walls. Jake Thompson pulled his worn hat lower over his weathered face, his sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon ahead. He had been riding for 3 days straight, following rumors of trouble brewing near the Apache reservation. Jake was no ordinary drifter. Once a respected sheriff in Colorado, he had left his badge behind after a corrupt town council destroyed everything he believed in. Now he wandered the frontier, helping those who had nowhere else to turn. His reputation as a skilled gunfighter and fair man had spread across the territory, though he preferred to stay in the shadows. As he crested a rocky hill, Jake spotted something that made his blood run cold. In the valley below, a crowd had gathered around 3 makeshift gallows. The angry voices of settlers carried on the wind, their faces twisted with hatred and fear. 3 young Apache women stood on wooden crates beneath the nooses, their hands bound behind their backs. Their dark eyes showed no fear, only defiance against the mob that wanted their lives. The leader of the crowd was a well-dressed man in an expensive suit, completely out of place in this rough frontier setting. He stood on a wooden platform addressing the settlers with theatrical gestures. His voice was smooth and convincing, painting the 3 women as dangerous criminals who had supposedly murdered innocent families. But something about his story did not ring true to Jake's experienced ears. Jake had dealt with enough liars and con men to recognize one when he saw him. The man's hands were too soft for frontier life, his boots too clean, his manner too polished. This was not a simple case of frontier justice gone wrong. There was something much deeper and more sinister happening here. Moving closer while staying hidden behind the rocks, Jake could hear fragments of the speech. The man claimed the 3 Apache women had attacked a wagon train, killing women and children in cold blood. He spoke of scalping and torture, of innocent blood spilled by savage hands. The crowd grew more agitated with each word, their anger building to a dangerous peak. But Jake noticed something the crowd missed. The 3 Apache women showed no signs of recent violence. Their clothes were clean, their hands unmarked by blood or struggle. These were not hardened warriors fresh from battle. They looked more like they had been plucked from their daily lives and dragged here against their will. The youngest of the 3 could not have been more than 18 years old. She had delicate features and intelligent eyes that reminded Jake of his own daughter, lost to fever years ago. The sight of her standing there facing death with such courage stirred something deep in his chest. He had failed to protect his own family, but maybe he could save these innocent lives. The well-dressed man raised his hand for silence. The crowd fell quiet, hungry for blood and vengeance. He began to count down, giving the signal for the execution to begin. Jake knew he had only moments to act. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt .45 at his hip, the familiar weight reassuring in his palm. Taking a deep breath, Jake spurred his horse forward and burst from his hiding place. His sudden appearance startled the crowd, causing them to step back in confusion. His horse kicked up clouds of dust as he rode straight toward the gallows, his steely gaze fixed on the man in the expensive suit. The crowd parted before him like water, unsure of the stranger's intentions. Jake's reputation as a gunfighter was known throughout the territory, and smart men did not stand in his way when his hand rested on his weapon. The 3 Apache women looked up at him with surprise, perhaps seeing their first glimmer of hope in what seemed like their final moments. Jake brought his horse to a stop directly in front of the platform, his eyes never leaving the well-dressed man's face. The silence stretched taut between them, broken only by the nervous shuffling of feet and the whisper of wind through the canyon. In that moment, Jake knew he was about to uncover something that would shake the very foundations of this frontier community. The man in the suit tried to maintain his composure, but Jake could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. This was not part of his plan. The arrival of a skilled gunfighter with a reputation for justice was the last thing he wanted or expected. Whatever conspiracy was unfolding here, Jake was determined to expose it before 3 innocent lives were lost to a lie. Jake's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Hold on there, friend. This seems like mighty quick justice for such serious crimes." His words were calm but carried the authority of a man who had faced down countless dangerous situations. The crowd shifted nervously, uncertain whether to continue with their plans or listen to this unexpected interruption. The well-dressed man, who introduced himself as Samuel Blackwood, tried to regain control of the situation. He claimed to be a federal marshal sent to deal with the Apache threat, though Jake noticed he wore no badge and carried no official papers. Blackwood's story became more elaborate as he spoke, describing in graphic detail the supposed crimes committed by the three women. But Jake had spent years learning to read people, and every instinct told him Blackwood was lying. The details of his story kept changing, and he avoided making direct eye contact. More importantly, Jake recognized the subtle signs of a con man at work. Blackwood was playing on the crowd's fears and prejudices, using their hatred of the Apache to further his own agenda. Jake dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near his weapon. He approached the three Apache women, studying their faces carefully. The eldest, perhaps 30 years old, met his gaze with dignity despite her circumstances. Through broken English, she managed to communicate that they were peaceful members of their tribe, mothers and daughters who had been gathering medicinal herbs when armed men captured them. The youngest woman, barely more than a girl, had tears in her eyes but refused to let them fall. She spoke softly in Apache and the eldest translated. She says, "The white men came in the night. They took us from our homes while our families slept. We have done nothing wrong." Jake turned back to Blackwood, his expression hardening. "These women claim they were kidnapped from the reservation. That's a serious accusation against a federal marshal. Mind showing me your credentials?" Blackwood's confident facade began to crack. He stammered about leaving his papers in town, claiming they were too important to carry into dangerous territory. The crowd began to murmur among themselves, seeds of doubt taking root. Some of the older settlers, who had lived through enough frontier drama to recognize truth from fiction, started stepping back from the gallows. But Blackwood was not finished. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch, spilling its contents onto the ground. Gold jewelry, silver coins, and other valuable items scattered in the dust. "These are the stolen goods found on them," he declared. "Proof of their crimes against innocent families." Jake knelt down and examined the items carefully. His experienced eye immediately spotted several problems with Blackwood's evidence. The jewelry was too clean, showing no signs of wear or tarnish that would indicate it had been buried or hidden. The silver coins bore recent mint marks, far too new to have been in circulation for long. Most damning of all, some pieces still had tags attached, suggesting they had been purchased recently from a store. Standing up, Jake held one of the items for the crowd to see. "This here's a wedding ring with a jeweler's mark from Denver. Unless these ladies took a trip to Colorado recently, I'd say someone's trying to frame them." The crowd's mood began to shift. Angry murmurs arose, but now they were directed at Blackwood rather than the Apache women. Several men who had been eager for the execution just moments before now looked uncertain and ashamed. They realized they had been manipulated into nearly committing a terrible injustice. Blackwood sensed the change in atmosphere and grew desperate. He pulled a small pistol from his coat, pointing it at Jake. "You're interfering with federal business, stranger. Step aside or face the consequences." Jake smiled grimly. He had faced down men with bigger guns and meaner dispositions than Samuel Blackwood. In one fluid motion, he drew his Colt .45 and had it trained on Blackwood before the man could react. The crowd gasped at the speed of his draw, a reminder of why Jake Thompson was respected and feared throughout the territory. "I don't think you're any kind of federal marshal," Jake said quietly. "Matter of fact, I'm starting to think you're nothing but a common criminal with a fancy suit and a silver tongue." With his free hand, Jake reached up and cut the ropes binding the three Apache women. They rubbed their wrists gratefully but stayed close to Jake, understanding that he was their protector in this dangerous situation. The eldest woman whispered something in Apache, and Jake nodded, though he did not understand the words. Her tone was enough to convey her gratitude. Blackwood's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. He kept the pistol trained on Jake, but his hand was shaking. Around them, the crowd had backed away, sensing that violence was about to erupt. Some of the smarter settlers were already heading for their horses, wanting no part of whatever was about to unfold. Jake could see Blackwood calculating his options, weighing his chances of escape against the certainty of facing justice. But there was something else in the man's eyes, a desperation that went beyond simple fear of capture. Whatever scheme Blackwood was running, it was bigger than just framing three innocent women. Jake was determined to uncover the truth no matter where it led or what dangers lay ahead. The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, though only minutes had passed. Jake kept his weapon steady while studying Blackwood's increasingly nervous behavior. Something about this whole situation nagged at him. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to frame 3 Apache women? There had to be a bigger motive behind this conspiracy. Suddenly, the sound of approaching horses broke the tension. A group of riders emerged from the canyon, their faces grim and purposeful. Jake recognized them immediately as Apache warriors, likely family members of the 3 women. They had probably been tracking their missing relatives and followed the trail here. The crowd panicked at the sight of the Apache warriors. Most settlers fled toward their wagons and horses, abandoning any pretense of wanting justice. They had been brave enough when facing 3 helpless women, but armed Apache warriors were an entirely different matter. Within moments, only Jake, Blackwood, the 3 women, and the approaching warriors remained in the valley. The lead warrior was a man of perhaps 40 years, with silver threading through his black hair and scars that spoke of many battles. His eyes burned with controlled fury as he took in the scene before him. The gallows, the ropes, the evidence of what had almost happened to his people. When he spoke, his English was clear and precise. "I am Standing Bear, chief of these people. These women are my daughter and her sisters. Who dares to threaten the lives of innocent ones?" Blackwood's pistol wavered as he realized his situation had become far more dangerous. Facing one skilled gunfighter was bad enough, but now he was outnumbered by warriors who had every reason to want him dead. His silver tongue, which had served him so well with the settlers, would carry little weight with men whose family members had nearly been executed. Jake stepped forward, keeping his weapon trained on Blackwood while addressing Standing Bear. "Chief, I'm Jake Thompson. These women were about to be hanged for crimes they didn't commit. This man here was behind it, trying to frame them with planted evidence." Standing Bear's gaze shifted to the scattered jewelry and coins on the ground. His weathered face hardened as he recognized the deception. "My daughter and her sisters were gathering healing plants for our sick children. They know nothing of theft or murder. This man speaks with a forked tongue." The 3 Apache women rushed to their family members, tears of relief streaming down their faces. They spoke rapidly in their native language, describing their ordeal and how Jake had saved them from the noose. Standing Bear listened intently, his expression growing darker with each word. Blackwood, sensing that his situation was hopeless, decided to make one last desperate play. "You're all making a terrible mistake. I have powerful friends in Washington. Important men who won't stand for this interference with federal law." Jake laughed harshly. "Federal law doesn't include lynching innocent people based on planted evidence, and I'm betting your important friends in Washington never heard of you." It was then that one of the Apache warriors made a discovery that changed everything. While securing the area, he found Blackwood's saddlebags hidden behind some rocks. Inside were official documents, maps, and correspondence that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. The papers showed that Blackwood was not working alone. He was part of a larger group of men who had been systematically stirring up trouble between settlers and Apache tribes. Their goal was to provoke a war that would force the government to remove all Apache from their traditional lands. Once the tribes were gone, Blackwood and his associates could claim the mineral-rich territory for themselves. The documents revealed mining surveys showing significant silver and copper deposits in the heart of Apache territory. There were also forged government orders authorizing the forced relocation of native tribes and correspondence with corrupt officials who had been bribed to look the other way. The attempted execution of 3 innocent women was just one small part of a much larger and more sinister plan. Jake examined the papers carefully, his anger growing with each page. This was not just about greed or land grabbing. These men were willing to start a war that would cost hundreds of innocent lives, both Apache and settler, just to line their own pockets. The 3 women standing nearby had nearly died to further this evil scheme. Standing Bear studied the documents as well, his face a mask of controlled rage. "These papers speak of attacks that have not yet happened. They plan to murder our children and blame us for the deaths of settlers. They would make our people seem like monsters to justify their theft of our homeland." Blackwood, realizing that his entire operation had been exposed, made a final desperate attempt to escape. He fired his pistol wildly while diving toward his horse, hoping to break free in the confusion. But Jake was ready for such a move. His return shot was precise and immediate, striking Blackwood in the shoulder and spinning him to the ground. The false marshal writhed in the dust, clutching his wounded arm and cursing the day he had ever heard of Jake Thompson. His expensive suit was now torn and bloody, his confident facade completely shattered. The man who had nearly convinced a crowd to commit murder was now revealed as nothing more than a common criminal and would-be war profiteer. Standing Bear approached the wounded man, his hand resting on his knife. For a moment, Jake thought the chief might end Blackwood's life right there. But Standing Bear was a wise leader who understood that killing this man would only play into his associates' hands. Instead, he looked at Jake with respect and spoke words that would forge an unlikely alliance. "You have saved my family and exposed great evil. Standing Bear will not forget this debt. But these papers show the danger is not over. Will you help us stop the men who would bathe our lands in blood for their own gain?" Jake studied the documents more carefully as Standing Bear's warriors secured Blackwood with rawhide bonds. The correspondence revealed a network of corruption that reached from local businessmen all the way to territorial officials in Phoenix. The conspiracy was far more extensive than Jake had initially suspected, involving dozens of conspirators across multiple towns and settlements. According to the papers, the next phase of their plan was already in motion. A group of disguised raiders would attack a settler family near Tombstone within the next few days, leaving behind Apache arrows and other evidence to implicate Standing Bear's tribe. The false evidence would trigger the larger conflict these men desperately wanted, giving them justification to seize Apache lands through military force. Standing Bear translated the documents for his warriors, their faces growing grim as they understood the scope of the threat against their people. These were not random acts of violence, but a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to destroy their way of life. The chief's daughter, the youngest of the 3 women who had nearly been executed, spoke up with surprising strength. "My father, I know the family they plan to attack. Sarah Coleman taught me to read English when I was a child. Her husband traded fairly with our people for many seasons. They have 3 small children. We cannot let innocent blood be spilled for these evil men's greed." Jake nodded approvingly. The girl had courage to match her intelligence, and her concern for the Coleman family showed the kind of character that made a mockery of the racist hatred these conspirators were trying to exploit. He had met the Colemans himself during his travels, and they were decent folks who deserved better than to become pawns in someone else's violent game. "The attack is planned for tomorrow night," Jake said, studying the timeline in the documents. "That gives us less than 24 hours to ride to Tombstone and warn them. But even if we save the Coleman family, these conspirators will just find another target. We need to stop this whole operation permanently." Standing Bear considered their options carefully. His warriors were skilled fighters, but a direct assault on the conspirators would only prove their claims about Apache aggression. They needed a more subtle approach, one that would expose the truth without giving their enemies ammunition for their propaganda campaign. It was then that Jake noticed something interesting in the correspondence. The letters mentioned a meeting scheduled for 3 days hence at an abandoned mining camp called Devil's Canyon. All the major players in the conspiracy would be there to divide up the Apache lands they expected to steal. More importantly, they planned to bring the forged government documents that would legitimize their land claims. If we could get our hands on those forged papers and the men who made them, Jake mused, we'd have enough evidence to bring down this whole operation. But it would mean walking into a nest of vipers with no backup and slim chances of getting out alive. Standing Bear smiled grimly. "My warriors have walked into many nests of vipers, Jake Thompson. We know the country around Devil's Canyon better than any white man. These conspirators may think they chose a safe place to meet, but they have picked the perfect spot for us to trap them. The plan they developed was dangerous but elegant in its simplicity. Standing Bear would take most of his warriors to secretly surround Devil's Canyon before the conspirators arrived. Meanwhile, Jake would ride to Tombstone to warn the Coleman family and gather any honest lawmen he could find. If everything went according to plan, they could capture the entire conspiracy leadership and their forged documents in one decisive action. But first, they had to deal with Blackwood. The wounded man had been listening to their conversation, and his face showed he understood exactly how much trouble he was in. Jake approached him, noting that the shoulder wound was painful but not life-threatening. Blackwood would live to face justice, assuming he cooperated with their plans. "You've got 2 choices," Jake told him bluntly. "You can help us stop your friends from murdering innocent people, or you can spend the rest of your short life tied to a tree in this canyon." Standing Bear's people have long memories when it comes to men who threaten their families. Blackwood glanced nervously at the Apache warriors, who were watching him with undisguised hostility. He had seen what frontier justice looked like, and he had no illusions about his fate if he refused to cooperate. After several minutes of internal struggle, he finally nodded his agreement. "What do you want to know?" he asked quietly. The information Blackwood provided filled in many crucial details about the conspiracy. He revealed the names of the other major players, including a corrupt territorial judge named Hamilton Morse, who had been taking bribes to legitimize fraudulent land claims. More importantly, he confirmed that the meeting at Devil's Canyon would include everyone with real authority in the organization. As the sun began to set over the Arizona landscape, Jake prepared to ride for Tombstone. Standing Bear's daughter approached him before he left, carrying a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. Inside was a turquoise pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. "For saving our lives," she said simply, "and for seeing the truth when others chose to believe lies." Jake accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, understanding the honor she was bestowing upon him. In the Apache tradition, such gifts created bonds of friendship and mutual obligation that lasted for life. He carefully tucked the pendant inside his shirt, where it would rest close to his heart during the dangerous days ahead. As he mounted his horse and prepared to ride into the gathering darkness, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed in just one day. He had started the morning as a lone drifter with no particular destination. Now he was part of an alliance between former enemies, united in their determination to stop a conspiracy that threatened innocent lives on both sides of the racial divide. The ride to Tombstone would take most of the night, and Jake pushed his horse hard across the moonlit desert. Behind him, Standing Bear and his warriors were already beginning their own preparations for the showdown at Devil's Canyon. The fate of both Apache and settler families now rested on their ability to work together against a common enemy who saw them all as nothing more than obstacles to profit. Jake reached Tombstone just as the first light of dawn painted the desert sky pink and gold. His horse was exhausted from the hard ride, foam flecking its mouth and sides heaving with each breath. But they had made good time, arriving several hours before the planned attack on the Coleman family. Jake quickly found the local sheriff's office, hoping to enlist official help in stopping the conspiracy. Sheriff Bill Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s who had seen enough frontier violence to recognize trouble when it walked through his door. He listened carefully as Jake explained the situation, studying the documents they had taken from Blackwood's saddlebags. Morrison's face grew increasingly grim as he read the evidence of corruption and planned violence. "I know Judge Morse," Morrison said finally, always seemed a bit too eager to rule in favor of certain mining interests. "And these land transfer documents look authentic, but something feels wrong about them." He examined the papers more closely, pointing out subtle inconsistencies that only an experienced lawman would notice. Together, they rode out to warn the Coleman family. Tom Coleman was working in his fields when they arrived, his wife Sarah tending to their vegetable garden, while their 3 young children played nearby. The scene was one of peaceful frontier life, making the planned attack seem even more monstrous. Sarah Coleman's face went pale when Jake explained the danger they were in. She had indeed taught Standing Bear's daughter to read, and the friendship between the two families had lasted for years. The idea that someone would use her family's murder to justify a war against the Apache filled her with horror and rage. "Those children saved my youngest daughter's life last winter," she said, referring to Standing Bear's people. "When the fever almost took her, they brought medicine that our doctor said wouldn't work. She's alive today because of Apache healing knowledge. How could anyone believe we'd want war with such good neighbors?" Tom Coleman was equally outraged but more focused on practical matters. His family needed protection, and their remote farmstead was difficult to defend against a coordinated attack. Sheriff Morrison suggested moving them to town temporarily, but Tom was reluctant to abandon his crops and livestock. Jake proposed a different solution. Rather than simply hiding the Coleman family, they could use the planned attack as an opportunity to catch the raiders in the act. With proper preparation and positioning, they could capture the false evidence and the men planting it, providing undeniable proof of the conspiracy's methods. The plan required careful timing and considerable risk, The Coleman family would appear to follow their normal evening routine, but armed men would be hidden around the property. When the raiders attacked, they would find themselves surrounded by Jake, Sheriff Morrison, and several trusted deputies. The key was to take the attackers alive so they could testify about who had hired them. As evening approached, tension filled the air around the Coleman farmstead. The family went through the motions of their usual activities, but everyone was acutely aware of the danger lurking in the darkness. Jake positioned himself in the barn with a clear view of the house, while Morrison and his deputies spread out around the property perimeter. The attack came just after midnight, exactly as the documents had predicted. 6 masked riders approached the house silently, carrying torches and weapons. They moved with military precision, suggesting these were not random bandits but trained men following a specific plan. Jake watched them carefully, noting details that would help identify them later. The raiders began their assault by setting fire to the barn and livestock pens, creating chaos and drawing the family outside. As Tom Coleman emerged to fight the flames, one of the attackers prepared to shoot him down in cold blood. But Jake was ready. His rifle shot rang out across the night, striking the would-be killer's weapon from his hands. The battle was fierce but brief. Caught between Jake's position in the barn and the lawmen surrounding the property, the raiders found themselves trapped with no escape route. 2 were wounded in the gunfight, and the rest surrendered when they realized their situation was hopeless. More importantly, they were captured with Apache arrows and other planted evidence still in their possession. Under interrogation, the captured raiders revealed the names of the men who had hired them. As expected, the trail led directly back to Judge Morse and his associates in the conspiracy. But the raiders also provided information about the upcoming meeting at Devil's Canyon, confirming the details Blackwood had given them. Sheriff Morrison examined the fake Apache weapons the raiders had brought to plant at the scene. They were crude imitations, obviously made by someone with no real knowledge of Apache craftsmanship. Any expert would have immediately recognized them as forgeries, but they might have fooled angry settlers seeking someone to blame for the Coleman family's deaths. With the immediate threat to the Coleman family neutralized, Jake prepared to ride for Devil's Canyon. The meeting was scheduled for the next evening, giving him just enough time to reach Standing Bear and coordinate their final assault on the conspiracy's leadership. But as he prepared to leave Tombstone, Sheriff Morrison insisted on joining the expedition. "This corruption has been eating at my county like a cancer," Morrison said. "Judge Morse and his friends have been perverting justice for their own gain, and it's time someone called them to account. You'll need a lawman with you to make this official." Jake accepted the sheriff's offer gratefully. Having official law enforcement involved would make it much harder for the conspirators to claim they were victims of Apache aggression or vigilante justice. Morrison was a respected figure in the territory, and his testimony would carry significant weight with honest officials in Phoenix. As they rode toward Devil's Canyon, Jake reflected on how the situation had evolved. What had started as a simple rescue of 3 innocent women had become something much larger. They were now positioned to break up a conspiracy that threatened to plunge the entire region into unnecessary war and bloodshed. The ride to Devil's Canyon took them through some of the most beautiful and dangerous country in the Arizona territory. Red rock formations towered around them like ancient cathedrals, while hidden springs provided oases of green in the desert landscape. It was easy to understand why both Apache and white settlers would fight for control of such magnificent land, but Jake also understood that the land was big enough for everyone if people could learn to coexist peacefully. The friendship between the Coleman family and Standing Bear's people proved that cooperation was possible. The real enemy was not racial difference, but the greed of men who would profit from conflict and hatred. As they neared Devil's Canyon, Jake spotted smoke from Standing Bear's hidden camp. The Apache warriors had arrived ahead of schedule and were already in position around the meeting site. Tomorrow evening would bring the final confrontation with the conspiracy's leadership, and Jake was determined that justice would finally prevail. The abandoned mining camp at Devil's Canyon had once been home to hundreds of prospectors seeking their fortune in the Arizona territory. Now it stood empty and ghostly, with crumbling buildings and rusted equipment scattered across the canyon floor. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting. isolated enough that no honest person would stumble across their activities. Jake and Sheriff Morrison met with Standing Bear at sunrise, reviewing their final plans for capturing the conspiracy's leadership. The Apache chief had positioned his warriors strategically throughout the canyon, hidden among the rocks and abandoned structures. When the conspirators arrived for their meeting, they would find themselves surrounded with no avenue of escape. Standing Bear's daughter had insisted on joining the operation, despite her father's concerns for her safety. She pointed out that her ability to speak both English and Apache fluently made her invaluable for coordinating between the two groups. More personally, she wanted to see justice done for the men who had nearly taken her life and those of her sisters. As the day progressed, the conspirators began arriving at Devil's Canyon. Judge Hamilton Morse came first, accompanied by 2 armed bodyguards and carrying a leather satchel that presumably contained the forged documents. He was followed by Marcus Webb, a wealthy mine owner from Phoenix who had been financing the operation. Other familiar faces from Blackwood's correspondence appeared throughout the afternoon. The final arrival was Colonel James Patterson, a former military officer who had been recruiting the raiders and coordinating the false flag attacks. Patterson's involvement explained the military precision of the operations they had uncovered. He was a man with both the knowledge and connections necessary to make their scheme work on a large scale. From their hidden positions, Jake and his allies listened as the conspirators discussed their plans with chilling casualness. They spoke of murdered families and displaced tribes as if discussing livestock prices, showing no concern for the human cost of their greed. Judge Morse displayed maps showing how they intended to divide the Apache lands among themselves once the government forced relocation. The most damning moment came when Colonel Patterson presented his report on the recent operations. He boasted about how close they had come to triggering a war with the attempted execution of the 3 Apache women, describing it as a masterstroke of psychological warfare. The callous way he spoke of nearly murdering innocent people made even the hardened Sheriff Morrison clench his fists in anger. As evening fell, the conspirators felt secure enough to begin celebrating their anticipated success. They passed around bottles of expensive whiskey and talked about the fortunes they would make once the Apache were removed from their lands. Their arrogance and confidence made them careless, exactly what Jake and Standing Bear had hoped would happen. The signal for the attack came when Judge Morse opened his satchel to display the forged government documents. Standing Bear's war cry echoed through the canyon as Apache warriors emerged from their hiding places, surrounding the conspirators with rifles and traditional weapons. Simultaneously, Jake and Sheriff Morrison moved in from the opposite direction, cutting off any chance of escape. The conspirators' reactions revealed their true characters. Judge Morse immediately tried to hide behind his bodyguards, while Marcus Webb attempted to destroy the incriminating documents. Colonel Patterson reached for his weapon but found himself facing Jake's Colt .45 at point-blank range. The man who had orchestrated so much violence proved to be a coward when faced with real danger. Sheriff Morrison took charge of securing the prisoners and evidence, while Standing Bear's warriors ensured that none of the conspirators could escape into the desert. The forged documents were recovered intact, providing irrefutable proof of the conspiracy's scope and methods. Additional evidence found in their belongings revealed the names of corrupt officials throughout the territory. The trial that followed became one of the most significant legal events in Arizona Territory history. Judge Morse and his associates faced charges of conspiracy, attempted murder, fraud, and inciting violence between racial groups. The testimony of the captured raiders, combined with the documentary evidence and witness accounts, made conviction inevitable. Sheriff Morrison's involvement proved crucial in ensuring that justice was served fairly and completely. His reputation for honesty helped convince other lawmen and territorial officials to take the charges seriously. Several corrupt officials mentioned in the documents were also arrested and prosecuted, cleaning up a network of corruption that had existed for years. Standing Bear's testimony at the trial was particularly powerful. Speaking in both Apache and English, he described the impact of the conspiracy on his people and their desire for peaceful coexistence with their neighbors. His dignity and intelligence challenged many of the racial stereotypes that the conspirators had tried to exploit for their own gain. The Coleman family also testified about the planned attack on their farm and their long, Friendship with Standing Bear's people. Sarah Coleman's description of how Apache medicine had saved her daughter's life brought tears to many eyes in the courtroom. Their story proved that cooperation between different cultures was not only possible but beneficial for everyone involved. Jake found himself testifying as the key witness who had uncovered the conspiracy and prevented its ultimate success. His reputation as an honest man and skilled investigator carried significant weight with the jury. When asked why he had risked his life to save 3 Apache women he had never met, his answer was simple and direct. Because it was the right thing to do. Justice doesn't depend on the color of a person's skin or the language they speak. Wrong is wrong. Whether it's done to Apache settlers or anyone else, the verdicts were unanimous. Judge Morse received 20 years in territorial prison, while Colonel Patterson and Marcus Webb received 15 years each. The other conspirators received lesser sentences but still faced significant prison time. More importantly, their land claims were declared fraudulent and their stolen property was returned to its rightful owners. In the months that followed, relations between Apache tribes and settlers in the region improved dramatically. The exposure of the conspiracy helped many people understand how they had been manipulated by men seeking profit from conflict. Trade and cooperation increased, benefiting both communities economically and culturally. Jake resumed his wandering lifestyle, but he maintained his friendship with Standing Bear and his people. The turquoise pendant given to him by the chief's daughter became his most treasured possession, a reminder of the day when justice triumphed over greed and hatred. Sheriff Morrison offered him a permanent job as a deputy, but Jake preferred the freedom of the open trail. Years later, when Arizona became a state, the peaceful coexistence between different communities in that region became a model for other areas struggling with similar conflicts. The story of the lone rider who saved 3 Apache women from the Noose became legend, told around campfires and in saloons throughout the Southwest. But for Jake Thompson, the real victory was not the fame or recognition, but the knowledge that he had helped prevent a war and saved innocent lives on both sides of a divide that never should have existed in the first place.